My personal experience in doing outbreak response for the CDC was that every year after the next, there was always some new epidemic or outbreak or pandemic. And when you look at the data on infectious disease emergence, it shows that is actually happening. We are seeing more and more infectious diseases occurring, and that's largely because of human encroachment on the environment. As humans change the way land is naturally formed, such as through deforestation, or trade wildlife, or raise farmed animals in unsafe conditions. And in the backdrop of all of that, climate change is happening. We are creating conditions for pathogens, particularly viruses, to jump from animals into people. To help us transform from our current model that's very siloed to this transdisciplinary approach, I'd have several suggestions. Number one is that we have to change the way problem solvers are educated. They have to be taught to think across disciplines rather than to think in narrow silos, because the solutions are necessarily going to require transdisciplinary approaches. Number two is that we have to change the way health efforts are funded. That means research needs to be funded differently so that we're not just looking into deep dive particular problems, for example, how a particular protein might work, but that we're also thinking at the macroscopic level about why infectious diseases are emerging. We need to change the way philanthropies fund health work. They can't just think about health in a very narrow perspective. They have to be combining conservation and public health as a joint effort, because ultimately conservation is public health. And then the other thing I would suggest is that health professionals need to start speaking up. Veterinarians and ecologists and mammalogists and others have been talking about One Health for decades, but it's actually people on the human health side that have been slow to understand that our health as humans is related to the health of the planet. And I say this as a physician, but we need to have more doctors, nurses, midwives, other types of professionals speaking up who are focused on the human health side to underscore that human health is linked to the state of the environment.
I think a lot of it goes to talking amongst each other. I mean, identification of groups that are working in the animal health sector along with those that are working in the human health side, not only in the public health architecture, but also doing implementing programs that are funded, I think is integral to having identify issues, gaps, and then addressing those gaps at the country level, and creation of new programs where there's more interconnectedness.
We understand very well scientifically where epidemics are likely to begin. We know how spillover occurs, the movement of pathogens like viruses from wildlife reservoirs to livestock and people. We know where in the world that happens. We know how that tends to happen. What's really missing from the whole equation is how frequently it actually happens. We only notice the epidemics that become big, large, that get caught by global surveillance systems, but we don't know what we're missing. And so to really understand the question of how frequently spillover occurs and how many times spillover happens that doesn't cause a pandemic or an epidemic, we need to get out there and start measuring that. And the key to doing that is to look at rates of exposure to viruses and other pathogens in livestock and in people in parts of the world that we know are most vulnerable, meaning they have the most amount of contact with wildlife or with livestock and wildlife. And that is where the science needs to go to really get at the question of how to develop interventions that are going to effectively reduce the rate of spillover.